Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, sometimes you'll watch a movie and you'll wish the story was made up, even though it's not. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down and chew the fat and talk with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brains on not only the project at hand, but state of the business, how they got started, influences, yada yada yada, in a very light and conversational way, because it's that's how I like to do it here. It's just, it's my show. I'll do as I want. But if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and we certainly hope that you do because you're listening, you can do that over at Apple, over at Spotify, and you can find all of our episodes archived on our YouTube channel. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you'd follow us on social media. You can do that on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and as I always say, most importantly, please give us a visit where it all began over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest news, reviews, lists, anything else we can think of from the world of entertainment, be it at home, be it abroad, be it no matter which way it is, because we love the moving image, and we love talking about it, and we love writing about it. It's kind of what we do. But that's enough of that, because on this episode, we got a real interesting one. We are talking with author and director Stephen Janis and subject Kelvin Sewell about the film The Friendliest Town, and it's so relevant to what's going on today, especially after the death of George Floyd and the calls for real reform of law enforcement all across North America. It's a shocking tale, but it's a true tale where the first African American police chief of this small town called Pocomoke in Pocomoke, Maryland. That's a tongue twister. Comes in with a mandate to really incentivize the community and talk to the community and get out there. And it's because it is a very split community that racially, and there's a lot of crime, and he manages to bring it down, but eventually he gets fired. And not just gets fired, but the executive leadership of this town and of the law enforcement structure in these small towns really starts to go after him and really try to destroy him in a way that is shocking beyond belief. But it's racism at its most insidious, and it's the fear of change, and it is so many different layers of the horrible things that are going on in the world today that need to be rectified and brought to the light. And I think Stephen does a great job, because he is a journalist by trade, but this is his directorial debut, and he does a pretty good job of it, if I don't mind saying so myself. But we sat down with Stephen and we talked with Kelvin about their story and their hopes of telling this story with audiences everywhere going forward, because it's an important story to share with the world. And I mean, if it is out on VOD and digital and various platforms right now, and I recommend you check out The Friendliest Town, because it is one of those documentaries that feels like it's vital. And I mean, I can't stress that enough. It's one of those things that people need to see, because these stories are still going on in various places all across the world, even in our backyard, as much as we don't want to admit it. It's an important film, and I hope you enjoy our talk with Stephen and Kelvin. But I mean, first off, obviously, I just want to say thank you both for the time today. I really appreciate you guys coming on, and just congratulations on the film. I was really struck by it, because it's one of those stories that if I had tried to write this as a screenplay and pitch it in Hollywood, I'd have gotten thrown out of the room, because it wouldn't have been believed.
Yeah.
I guess my first question is for you, Stephen. Like, walk me through sort of your initial discovery of how this was all happening and your sort of initial introduction to these events.
As I say in the film, I knew Kelvin from before because as a reporter covering police in Baltimore, he had been a person I'd talked to and gotten context on policing. But when he went down to Pocomoke, I thought he had left sort of all the politics of policing behind, and was implementing his community policing plan, and it was all working, and so it just seemed like a good news story, right? And when he suddenly was fired without explanation, it was so stunning because when I went down to Pocomoke, I was stunned by the community's sort of connection to him, and the fact that the community like was willing to fight for him. I never, I live in a city where the police and the community are completely at odds. So to me, it was like a fascinating story because it just was antithetical or contravening everything that I ever thought about policing, especially in a big city. But then when the politics started emerging, it ended up being almost as bad, if not worse, than anything I've ever seen in a big city. So it was like a really contradictory story in that sense.
No, for sure. I mean, it's one of those things where it feels like one of those events that you sort of expect to play on sort of the grander stage in sort of a big
Hmm.
city, but seeing these kind
Yeah,
of things unfold in small town America was one of sort of those enlightening things. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, when
yeah.
in this process did it turn from reporting on a story to making a movie?
Well, I think, especially when I had the interview. There's an interview with a woman who had been caught up in a couple drug investigations, and she told me that they had been trying to get her to testify or to lie about Kelvin, and basically make him a criminal. And I was like, whoa. I mean, I've seen some crazy stuff in Baltimore, but this is worse than anything I've ever seen. And at that point I'm like, okay, this needs a full documentary because this story, the complexity of the story has to be told in all parts. And her, her revelations were like, wow, this is pretty scary. I mean, this isn't, I mean, it's small town policing. What's the big deal? And now they're talking about criminalizing Kelvin and charging him with a crime. At that point, I was like, this has to be documented fully from beginning to end, just because I couldn't believe what was happening.
Now, I mean, I'd love both of you to chime in on this because I was really struck by just I can imagine that if you had just been sort of random reporter or random filmmaker coming into town, it may have been a little bit harder to get the access, but because you already knew Kelvin and had a relationship, it
Hmm.
almost felt like you could hit the ground running a little bit. And I'm kind of curious,
Hmm.
how important was that relationship from both your perspectives just to be able to tell the story the right way?
Well, telling the story the right way was important. Um, Everybody depended on the media part of this to be put out there because for so long, in situations like this, you only hear one side of the story. And then when I called Stephen, told Stephen to come down here, and Stephen came down, we needed them to know the truth and not what they just wanted to put out for the community to hear. So that relationship that me and Stephen had prior to this incident helped out a lot because as one of the community members said down there, we would have known none of this if the real news didn't get involved in this, and that's how much the people down there were shut out. If it wasn't for Stephen, it still wouldn't have came out.
Yeah, and I think the people, once we published a couple stories, and it wasn't there was a lot of with the community, and you can see if you watch the documentary how important the community was to telling the story. They were accustomed to as Kelvin said, the media down there sort of covering it from the perspective of the people of power and influence. And so after we posted our first couple of stories, I think it was kind of revelatory for the community because they're like, wow, this is not just one-sided. And so we kind of built a relationship with the people in the community where they trusted us. And you're right. And that's a really good point. That was very critical because if they hadn't trusted us, we couldn't have gotten the information we got about what was happening. I mean, they were willing to talk honestly and openly about what was going on behind the scenes, and that was critical. And I think that trust was what made the film actually work.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, just in seeing everything unfold and seeing what Kelvin was doing and seeing the positive results that were happening. And I mean,
Hmm.
it really does kind of speak to, especially in institutions of power, like putting any kind of racial discrimination aside for 1 second, it really does speak to sort of the initial fear of change, the initial oh wait, you're doing something that isn't the way I do it and you're making me look bad kind of thing. There is really sort of that inherent fear of
Yes.
change that we don't necessarily expect to see in a small town. But I mean, I would imagine that would be probably the last place we're going to see it, because it's going to filter down from the larger city centers to the smaller towns.
Right.
When I first went to Pocomoke City, my goal in mind was to keep everybody safe. And as you mentioned, a small town, I had no idea coming from Baltimore how a small town operated. All I cared about was I was a cop and my job was to keep everybody safe. What I've learned in Pocomoke City with the intertwines of a smaller town is they wing it. For example, they go day by day with the government, how they're going to handle things, how they're going to do things. And where I come from, a big city like Baltimore City, things are put in place. But down there is who's ever king that day is going to make the decision, and that's it. And that time, that was the city manager, Russell Blake, who was there for 40 years. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything unless Russ Blake said so. And that just didn't set right with me, because this I cared about the people, and you can't tell me how to be a police or how to be a cop. You're a city manager, and so many times that the city manager, the council tried that, and in a situation, what took place, me firing officers who filed EEOC complaints. Some of the things you just cannot do based on the EEOC laws and the laws itself.
Yeah. And, another thing is law enforcement is big business in small towns. This is something I cover as a reporter. And, Kelvin's style of policing was kind of interfering with the business, because as one of the residents told us, you had the Worcester County Drug Task Force, which is one of those drug units, would come into town, arrest people, carry them off to the county jail. And it was a good business for them. And, they make lots of overtime. So Kelvin's style of policing interfered with the business of policing on the Eastern Shore. And I think there were a lot of people who didn't like that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And also, basically, just to touch on what Steven said, a lot of times the Worcester County Sheriff would come in town and lock up all of these kids and take them away down to and process them in Snow Hill, Maryland. But my goal, my concept was to help these kids out. It was a time when they would come in and didn't have anything to do, and they were of age and finished high school, but didn't have didn't have anything to do with their life. So I would help them fill out college applications. I had a rapport with the school at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and I would help them fill out their FAFSA forms. I have to help them get jobs, anything so they can stay off the streets where they can be subject to arrest, and that's what I did. And prior to that, what I did was I made sure I went around and made sure I looked at the hot spots in Pocomoke City, and what I wanted to do was make sure I ordered the officers to get out their cars and walk foot patrol. Therefore, getting to know the community down there and building a rapport with the community, which is what happened, and teaching them value police reform before it even got talked about prior to Pocomoke City.
For sure. And in watching it all, and especially the community involvement, I was so struck, because it really does feel like almost a template for other towns to use, especially if issues like this come up again, which, that's horrible to say, but they probably almost certainly will, given the state of the system. And I'm kind of curious, was it something organic? Was it something that was drummed up along the way after you got fired, or was it a bit
it was definitely drummed up, because they wanted to try, like Steven said, they wanted to try to destroy me. And we didn't find a lot of this out until after Steven talked to Jerry Fitch about how they were trying to come after me in 2012. But it definitely drummed up, how can I get to this guy or get something on this guy? They tried prior to them, this accident report that happened, that charged me with in 2014. Mind you, that was fired in 2015, but they went back and tried to find something else. How can I get? So they used every resource they could to try to come after me, and the resource they used was no good, because as we talked to the court special appeal judge, he said, I can't believe you charged this man again. The first time you didn't have anything. The second time you definitely don't have anything. But that was their way of functioning, dealing with people in their own way.
But one thing that's really interesting, because we spent a lot of time in the community where Kelvin had the officers walk, and we were talking to this very influential religious leader there, Bishop Wayne Jenkins. I think not Wayne Jenkins. Sorry, hold on, Bishop Jenkins, and he said to us he was sitting there one day in his house and he looked out the window and he saw Kelvin walking by, and he was stunned because he'd never seen a police officer walk in the community, and he was like and he said it really shocked everyone in this community. It's called the Backburn, which is a predominantly African American neighborhood that really has has really bad housing and beset by poverty. And he said it was like a revelation for the community to see. They just didn't know at first what to make of it when Kelvin was like walking around on the streets, because they were just used to law enforcement being impersonal, even in a small town, impersonal, and like we said, the drug units. And I think the thing that you were talking about, what was so profound, although it seemed simple, was having police, policing from a perspective of compassion was just something they just it blew them away. It literally was like, wow, this can work. We can have this. We don't have to have, people come in with, plain clothes, locking us up and running us out of town. We can actually have someone come in who cares about how we feel. It was really like, for the town, like, transformative.
How do you think? No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And then let's touch on what Stephen said again. When I ordered the officers out of the cars, my goal was to have them walk around and get to meet the people in the community. And sometimes the officers, they didn't want to do it at first, but after I told them, if I'm going to do it, you're going to do it. And so the officers started walking foot on a regular basis. Then I got getting complaints. Well, Chief, they don't speak back. Okay, well, you get paid to speak. Keep speaking. And that led into, I couldn't walk down the street without people telling me, elderly people, we're so glad you're here because we feel safe now, because the community disengaged with the police department, and that's how it took off. If anybody would try to commit a crime in Pocomoke City, I get like 30 or 40 phone calls within 5 minutes. And by that time, I'm saying, stop calling. I already know who did it. Thank you. And that's how much the community engaged with the police department. Leaving there, the hurtful part of me in Pocomoke City was leaving there after 5 years, coming from homicide in Baltimore City, leaving Pocomoke City with not one single homicide in 5 years. That made me feel good because prior to me going down there, Pocomoke City was like Dodge City. But now, when I was fired, July 2015, the homicides picked up again starting October 2015, 3 months after I left. And it was disturbing because some of the young men who were killed were some of the young men I was working with. Okay. And once I left there, they had nobody else to go and talk to lean on to help them out. And so Worcester County picked up their plan again to start coming into town, locking them up and taking them off to jail. But prior to that, we had a 30-year all-time low with 0 homicides. And they couldn't use the fact that they fired me because crime was high, because crime was at a 30-year all-time low with no homicides. So they had to find something, and that's what they used.
And I was so amazed, just like you said in the film, if they had fired you, that would be one thing, but there was such an active campaign to sort of actively destroy you and to sort of go against the compassion that you did put out there on the street. And I'm kind of curious, how do you sort of, at least going forward, try to change the system? Is it through compassion, or is it through I'm kind of looking through the way through, if you understand what I'm trying to say? It really is one of those things that is shocking, because I've got to figure there still has to be a way to not just monetize big business, compassion, but push it forward, because at the very least it's the right thing to do.
Well, a little bit of compassion is there, but also it's getting out there, knowing the people and holding every officer accountable to doing their job every single day. If you look at Baltimore City, and I looked at Pocomoke City when I went down there, it were people riding around in police cars with their windows rolled up. They didn't know who was who. They cut themselves off from the community. And that's the first thing I noticed when I arrived to Pocomoke City, because nobody knew who I was. I just walked down the street. I wanted to see the hot spots myself. So I just walked down the street into every neighborhood and drove around the neighborhood, and I wanted to see what areas are the most troublesome. And they were the areas I concentrated in. So you got to use some compassion there, but you also got to use some skilled sense, whereas how do you handle this? Well, for a long time, in order to help a community, you need the community engagement. And that was the only thing that was on my mind. Get out there, get out your cars, and park those cars and get out and know the community. And it worked.
I think one of the things that people don't realize in communities like the back, the only form of governance they see are these police officers, and generally they tend to be hostile.
Yeah.
So they get, like Kelvin said, disengaged. They think the system is out. The system is unfairly biased against them, and it's true. So the gesture of having people walk was sort of a symbol saying, yeah, this might be the only form of governance you see, but we're not just going to be cruel. We're going to try to help you. And it's odd that it would be policing that would have to do that, but that's the way that's where we put our resources. If you look at the budget of Pocomoke City, more than a third goes to policing, and that's true in many communities. Like Baltimore City is similar. We put all this money in policing, and the only form of governments people know is policing. So when Kelvin changed that strategically style of policing, I think it had a huge impression on the people of the city.
No, I mean, I'd love both your perspective on this because, I mean, this really does feel like the difference between policing a community, which is obviously a necessary and important thing, versus
Absolutely.
running a police state, which seems to be what a
Mm-hmm.
lot of cities, big and small in America, and probably in Canada as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be fair with that, that seem to be pushing that kind of ideology on police forces, especially when it comes to
Yeah.
minority neighborhoods and communities.
Yeah, I mean, we've in this country we prosecuted the war on drugs for 40 years, and I think it has a lot to do with it because the war on drugs has created or spawned, I would say, these specialized units, the tactical idea of policing, and then you had 9/11, and then police became more militarized. We have a program in this country called 1030 that distributes militarized equipments and tanks, personal armor carriers to police departments. And it's just evolved into something completely entirely different from the idea of Mayberry, that we had 40, 50 years ago, where police officer was integrated into the town's culture. And I think that's what Kelvin was trying to do.
I mean, I guess just to put a bow on this, and I'd
Yeah.
love both your perspectives. I'm kind of curious, how do you think we ultimately go forward to try to change the system? Is it through sort of having police forces be out there, or is it going to be sort of a mixture of that versus communities sort of willing and being courageous enough to step up and go, you know what? No, we like what this guy was doing. He was doing the right way. Let's keep trying to do it this way because we want that.
Kelvin, you want to go first on
Well,
that?
the approach and the strategy that was used in Pocomoke City in a small town, it could be the same approach and strategy used in a larger city. Basically, you have to get that engagement with the community. You can't be us against them or them against us. You got to be the same. Like I used to tell my officers sometimes, well, don't go out there and walk foot patrol, but they don't like us. They're not going to eat you. Just go out and walk with them, talk to them, say hi, and that community engagement means a lot. And once you do that, the community is going to have a sense that, hey, you do care.
Well, so I mean, I would say that really we have to end the war on drugs in this country pretty much quickly because it infiltrates so many aspects of policing and corrupts it, and I think that's got to be number one. And we've got to get rid of tactical units, even though some of the worst aspects of policing come from these tactical units, like the Worcester County Drug Task Force. We have to end the militarization of policing and the militarized attitude that pervades policing. So it's really a cultural shift. Taking an example of Kelvin's particular strategy and taking it to a level of saying, yeah, I mean, there's no point in policing like us against them in this country. I mean, every person, people are complex. Sometimes they do bad things, sometimes they do good things. But if you create a situation where the police are sort of presumed to be at odds with the community, it'll never succeed. And I think that's what's got to change.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I mean, I really hope this film is at least a small step in the right direction towards just putting a spotlight on these problems and trying to move forward and make change in a positive way because it's going to be a tall mountain to climb, and we've just got to keep pushing that boulder up the hill one step at a time to try to make sure that we can do these things the right way.
Yeah. Great. Well, I hope so. We hope
Yeah,
so.
I hope
That's
so.
why we spent 5-6 years documenting this. So hopefully it'll be helpful.
Well, thanks for the work and thanks for the time today. I appreciate you both.
All right.
And
Thanks so
congratulations
much.
again.
You're welcome. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot for having us.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.